My family refused to attend my wedding because my fiancé was a single father. My dad told the entire congregation that my husband would ruin my life. But on the day I walked down the aisle to empty family pews, his 10-year-old daughter carried a sign instead of flowers. When the guests read what it said, there was not a dry eye in the room. Someone filmed it, and within 48 hours, it hit 200 million views. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Lauren, 33 years old, and a pediatric speech therapist. I was sitting frozen in the front pew of our sprawling Texas megachurch. The air conditioning was freezing, but I was sweating through my Sunday dress. Up on the pulpit, my father Richard, the head elder of the church, was delivering his Sunday sermon. His booming voice echoed through the massive auditorium, reaching all 500 congregants. He was supposed to be preaching about family values. Instead, he was publicly dissecting my life. He paced back and forth across the stage, his face tight with self-righteous anger. He leaned into the microphone and his words cut through the silent sanctuary. Some people in this very room are willing to tarnish the purity of their family name for blind infatuation. They bring home used baggage from broken lives and call it love. They ignore the financial and spiritual ruin that comes from taking on the burdens of a man who could not even keep his own house intact. Every single word felt like a physical strike. He was talking about David, my David, the man I was marrying in exactly 3 weeks. David was a widower raising his 10-year-old daughter Sophie after a devastating tragedy. He was the kindest, most resilient man I had ever met. But to my father, David was nothing more than used baggage because he came with a past and massive medical bills. The congregation shifted uncomfortably. I could feel the weight of 500 pairs of eyes burning into the back of my neck. Whispers started rippling through the pews behind me. The older women from the choir leaned together, murmuring behind their hymnals. My mother, Catherine, sat right next to me, staring straight ahead, with a tight, perfectly rehearsed smile on her face. She did not even flinch. She just patted her pearl necklace and nodded along with my father. I wanted to sink into the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the wooden edge of the pew until my knuckles turned white. For 33 years, I had been the family scapegoat, the quiet daughter who chose to help children with speech disorders instead of chasing corporate wealth. I had swallowed every insult and every passive-aggressive comment at family dinners. But doing this publicly, using his position of spiritual authority to humiliate the man I loved, was an entirely new level of cruelty. I looked around the massive room with its stained glass windows and crystal chandeliers. This place was supposed to be a sanctuary, but it felt like an arena, and I was the main event. My father finally locked eyes with me from the stage. His gaze was cold and unyielding. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to stand up, apologize, and beg for his forgiveness in front of the entire church. But I did not break. I sat there suffocating under the heavy silence until the final hymn was sung. The absolute second the service ended and the choir started their closing number, I stood up. I did not wait for my mother. I did not shake hands with the greeters in the aisle. I pushed past the crowd, ignoring the pitying looks and the fake sympathetic smiles from the church elders' wives. I marched straight down the carpeted hallway and shoved open the heavy oak door of the vestry. My father was inside, pouring himself a glass of water like he had just finished a casual morning jog. My mother walked in right behind me, closing the door to shut out the noise of the congregation. I was shaking with anger. "How could you do that?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "How could you stand up there and call David used baggage in front of 500 people?" My mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively as she checked her makeup in the mirror. "Oh, Lauren, do not be so dramatic," she sighed. "Your father was just preaching the truth. He is trying to protect this family. You are about to ruin your life by marrying a bankrupt widower with a sick child. We are just trying to wake you up before you make a massive mistake." "Protect the family," I repeated, staring at her in disbelief. You just publicly humiliated me." My father set down his glass and turned to me, his expression hard. "I used my platform to warn the flock about the dangers of unequal yoking," he said smoothly. "If you feel convicted by the message that is between you and your conscience, you are bringing shame to our reputation, Lauren. A pediatric speech therapist's salary is barely enough to support yourself, let alone a man drowning in medical debt and a 10-year-old with leukemia." Before I could defend David, the vestry door swung open again. In walked my younger sister Brittany, followed closely by her husband Jamal. Brittany was 29, the undisputed golden child of the family. She was dripping in designer labels, holding a $5,000 handbag my parents bought her just for attending church. Jamal, a brilliant and highly successful African-American corporate lawyer, stood quietly behind her adjusting his tailored suit. Jamal was a good man, but he was fiercely loyal to the family dynamic and heavily influenced by my parents' constant praise of his success. Brittany rolled her eyes the moment she saw me. "Are you seriously throwing a tantrum right now, Lauren?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Dad made valid points. You are embarrassing us. Why can you not just find a normal guy? Look at Jamal. He is a senior partner at his firm. He does not have ex-wives or sick kids draining his bank account. Why can you never just do things the right way?" I looked at Jamal, hoping for a shred of empathy. Instead, he pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at me with clinical detachment. "From a purely legal and financial standpoint, Lauren taking on the medical debt of a child who is not biologically yours is a catastrophic liability," Jamal said, his voice calm and measured. "Your parents are looking at the risk assessment. If his insurance continues to deny coverage for her treatments, you will be legally tethered to a sinking ship. They are trying to stop you from making a terrible investment." I stared at the four of them. My father the righteous leader, my mother the enabler, my sister the golden child, and my brother-in-law the calculating lawyer. They did not care about my happiness. They did not care about David or his character. They definitely did not care about a 10-year-old girl fighting for her life. They only cared about how my choices reflected on their perfect wealthy image and their bank accounts. I was entirely alone in a room full of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They had backed me into a corner expecting me to surrender and abandon the man I loved. But they had no idea what I was actually capable of, and they had no idea who David really was. The heavy oak door of the vestry swung open again, and my younger sister Brittany walked in. She did not look concerned or apologetic. Instead, she looked annoyed, like my mere existence was an inconvenience to her Sunday schedule. Brittany was wearing a tailored designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wedding budget. She walked with that signature entitlement my parents had spent nearly 30 years cultivating. Right behind her was her husband, Jamal. Jamal was a highly successful African-American corporate lawyer in downtown Dallas. He was brilliant, calculating, and usually a very reasonable man. But ever since he married into our family, my parents had practically brainwashed him. They constantly praised his wealth and status, making sure he knew he was the only acceptable type of son-in-law. As a result, Jamal often adopted their perspective, viewing everything through the cold lens of liability and asset management rather than human emotion. Brittany stopped in the middle of the room and crossed her arms. Her diamond ring caught the light from the chandelier above us. "Are you seriously doing this right now, Lauren?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are making a massive scene and embarrassing the entire family over a guy who cannot even pay his own bills." I stared at her, feeling the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Brittany had always been the golden child. Everything she did was celebrated, while everything I did was heavily criticized. When Brittany married Jamal, my parents threw a $200,000 country club wedding and paid for their honeymoon in Bora Bora. When I announced my engagement to David, my parents refused to even pay for the invitations. "I am not the one making a scene." "Brittany," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad is the one who just humiliated my future husband in front of 500 people." Brittany rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they might get stuck. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Dad was just speaking the truth and saving us all from the public relations nightmare you are about to cause. Do you have any idea how bad this looks for us? You are marrying a bankrupt widower who comes with a mountain of medical debt. Do you know what people at my country club are saying? They are laughing at us, Lauren. They think you are desperate." I turned to my mother, expecting her to at least tell Brittany to calm down. But Catherine just stood there adjusting her pearl necklace, nodding in agreement with her golden child. That is when Jamal cleared his throat and stepped forward. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, not like a brother-in-law, but like a senior partner evaluating a terrible merger. "Lauren, you need to step back and look at this objectively," Jamal said, his tone smooth and strictly professional. "Remove your emotions from the equation for just 1 minute. From a purely legal and financial standpoint, marrying David is a catastrophic liability. You are legally tethering yourself to a sinking ship." I felt my chest tighten. "Jamal, you do not know anything about David," I said. "You have barely spoken 2 words to him at family dinners." "I do not need to know him personally to read the writing on the wall," Jamal replied calmly. "I understand corporate risk and personal liability better than anyone in this room. Your father asked me to look into the cost of pediatric leukemia treatments. Do you have any idea what happens when a primary insurance provider denies a claim for experimental or out-of-network oncology care? You are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket expenses. If you marry him, his debt becomes your problem. Your assets become vulnerable. You are a pediatric speech therapist, Lauren. You do not make enough money to cover a fractional share of those medical bills, let alone protect yourself from bankruptcy." My father, Richard, stepped closer to Jamal, patting him proudly on the shoulder. "Listen to Jamal, Lauren," my father said, his voice echoing in the small room. "He is a successful man who understands how the real world works. He protects his family. He protects your sister. David cannot even protect his own daughter without dragging you down with him." I looked around the room, feeling completely suffocated. It was 4 against 1. It had always been 4 against 1. My entire life, I was the problem they needed to fix. If I got an A-, my mother asked why it was not an A+. If I bought a modest car, my father asked why I could not afford a luxury vehicle like Brittany. And now they were treating my marriage like a toxic asset they needed to liquidate. "Sophie is a 10-year-old girl," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "She is a little girl fighting for her life. She is not a liability. She is going to be my daughter. And David is a good man who works incredibly hard. You are all standing here talking about asset protection and public relations while a child is battling cancer. Do you hear yourselves? Do you hear how incredibly selfish and heartless you sound? You call yourselves Christians, but you are acting like corporate monsters." My mother gasped, pressing her hand against her chest, as if I had just slapped her. "How dare you speak to us that way?" Catherine snapped, her voice shrill and offended. "After everything we have done for you. We gave you a beautiful home and a private education, and this is how you repay us. You spit in our faces and choose a broken family over your own flesh and blood." "You are so naive," Lauren Brittany chimed in, stepping closer to my mother to form a united front. "You think love is going to pay the mortgage when the medical bills pile up. You think love is going to keep the bank from foreclosing on your house. You are ruining your life because you want to play savior to a man who is clearly using you. He is not using me." I fired back, my hands balling into fists. "He loves me, and I love him." Jamal shook his head, a look of genuine pity crossing his face. "Love does not hold up in court, Lauren," he said quietly. "When the creditors come calling, they will not care about your love story. They will care about your bank accounts. Your parents are simply trying to prevent you from making a decision that will mathematically destroy your future. I advise clients on these types of financial disasters every single day. I see the aftermath. It always ends in resentment and bankruptcy. You need to listen to your father and cancel this wedding before you do something irreversible. Jamal adjusted his expensive tie and took a step back, crossing his arms, just like my sister. They all stared at me, waiting for me to surrender and completely submit to their cruel demands. The room fell into a heavy and suffocating silence after Jamal finished his cold legal assessment. I stood in the center of the church vestry, completely surrounded by the 4 people who were supposed to be my support system. Instead of love and understanding, I was met with crossed arms and judgmental stares. My father, Richard, stood near his massive mahogany desk. My mother, Catherine, stood perfectly poised beside him, with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. My sister, Brittany, leaned against the wall with a smug expression on her face, while her husband, Jamal, watched me with the detached observation of a lawyer who had just delivered a closing argument. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears to fall, and for me to beg for their forgiveness. But the tears never came. Instead of crying, I felt an unexpected wave of clarity wash over me. For 33 years, I had allowed these people to dictate my worth. I had constantly chased their approval, trying to fit into their perfect mold. But looking at them now, I realized that their love was entirely conditional. It was a transaction. And today they were ready to close the account. My father broke the silence. He let out a deep, disappointed sigh and walked over to his expensive leather briefcase resting on the edge of the desk. The loud click of the brass buckles echoed sharply in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it in his hands for a moment, letting the anticipation build before he tossed it onto the glass coffee table in front of me. It landed with a heavy and decisive thud that made my stomach drop. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but steady. My father looked me dead in the eye. "That is the legal paperwork to sever your status as a beneficiary of your grandmother Beatrice and her trust fund." I stared at the thick stack of papers spilling out of the envelope. Grandma Beatrice had been the only person in this family who ever truly understood me. Before she passed away, she set up a trust fund for both Brittany and me. It was worth $2 million each. It was meant to secure our futures, to help us buy homes or start businesses. She had explicitly told me it was my safety net so I could pursue my passion for helping children without worrying about money. "If you walk out of this church and continue with this disastrous wedding, you will be cut off completely," my father stated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You will not receive a single penny from that trust. I am the primary executor of the estate, and I have the legal power to reallocate the assets if a beneficiary proves to be financially reckless. Marrying a man with a mountain of medical debt and a sick child is the definition of reckless. If you do this, Lauren, I will sign the authorization today and transfer your entire $2 million share directly into Brittany's accounts." Brittany did not even try to hide her delight. She smiled and casually inspected her manicured nails. "Honestly, Lauren, it is for the best," Brittany said, brushing a piece of blonde hair over her shoulder. "Jamal and I have been looking at commercial real estate in downtown Dallas. We could really use the extra capital to expand our investment portfolio. You would just end up wasting the money paying off the hospital bills for a kid that does not even belong to you. It would be a complete waste of Grandma Beatrice and her hard-earned wealth." I felt a sudden rush of heat flush through my body. The sheer cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She was talking about a 10-year-old girl with leukemia as if she was a bad stock investment. And my parents were standing right there nodding in agreement. My mother stepped forward, putting on her best mask of fake maternal concern. "We do not want to do this, Lauren," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You are forcing our hand. We love you too much to watch you throw your life away. All you have to do is cancel the wedding. Tell David it is over. You can move back home into your old bedroom, and we can put all of this behind us. We can even schedule a family vacation to Aspen next month to help you clear your head. Just sign the agreement to cancel the wedding and everything goes back to normal." I turned my gaze to Jamal. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking incredibly uncomfortable, but he still defended them. "Jamal, is this even legal?" I asked him directly. Can he really just take away the money Grandma Beatrice left specifically for me? Jamal avoided making eye contact with me for a brief second before putting his lawyer persona back on. Your grandfather structured the family trust with a strict discretionary and morality clause, Jamal explained smoothly. Your father, as the sole executor, has the fiduciary right to withhold or redirect funds if he believes the beneficiary is entering into a legally compromising or financially destructive contract. Marrying into massive medical debt unfortunately qualifies. It is completely legal, Lauren. If you fight it in court, you will lose. The documentation is ironclad. I reviewed it myself this morning. That was the final blow. My own brother-in-law, the man who sat at my dining table for Thanksgiving, had helped them draft the paperwork to steal my inheritance. They had planned this. They had sat around a table discussing how to trap me, how to use the only thing they cared about to force me into submission. They thought the threat of losing $2 million would terrify me. They thought money was my ultimate weakness because it was theirs. They were wrong. A profound and unshakable sense of peace suddenly settled over my heart. The fear and the anxiety that had choked me for my entire life instantly evaporated. I did not feel small anymore. I felt free. I looked at the paperwork on the table. Then I looked at Jamal. "Hand me your pen," I said calmly. Jamal blinked clearly, caught off guard. He hesitated for a moment before reaching into his suit jacket and pulling out his heavy gold pen. He handed it to me carefully. My father crossed his arms, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He thought I was going to sign the document agreeing to cancel the wedding. He thought he had won. I took the pen and leaned over the glass table. I completely ignored the first document, which was the agreement to end my engagement. Instead, I pulled out the second document, the renunciation of rights, the legally binding contract stating that I willingly forfeited my $2 million trust fund and transferred all rights and assets to my sister Brittany. "What are you doing?" my mother asked, her voice suddenly wavering with confusion. I did not answer her. I flipped straight to the last page where the signature line waited. I clicked the pen and signed my full legal name in bold, aggressive strokes. Then I dated it. I stood up, capped the gold pen, and placed it gently on top of the signed contract. I looked at my father and watched the smug expression completely melt off his face. It was replaced by absolute shock. He stared at the signature line, unable to comprehend what I had just done. "Keep your money," I said, my voice ringing loud and clear in the small room. "Keep the trust fund. Keep the country club memberships and the luxury cars and the perfect public image. You can buy all the designer bags in the world, Brittany, but you will never be able to buy a soul." "Lauren, you are making the biggest mistake of your life," my father shouted, his face turning bright red. "You will have nothing. You will be completely ruined." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in months. "I have never been richer than I am right now," I replied. "You thought this money was a leash, but you just cut me loose. You are right about one thing, Dad. I am making a choice today. I am choosing a man who knows how to love unconditionally. I am choosing a brave little girl who fights for her life with more grace than anyone in this room has ever shown. I am choosing my real family." I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak door. My mother called out my name, her voice finally cracking with panic, but I did not stop. I grabbed the brass handle, pulled the door open, and stepped out into the brightly lit hallway. I left them standing there in the vestry, trapped in their cold, empty world of wealth and liabilities. I walked out of the church and into the bright Texas sunlight, ready to marry the love of my life. 3 weeks later, the bright Texas sun was shining through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Botanical Garden Conservatory where we were holding our wedding. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The venue was absolutely breathtaking, filled with thousands of white roses and draped in soft silk fabrics that caught the golden afternoon light. It was everything I had ever dreamed of since I was a little girl. But as I stood in the bridal suite staring at my reflection in the full-length mirror, my stomach was tied in unbearable knots. I was wearing a beautiful ivory lace gown, but I felt completely hollow inside. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my bouquet of white peonies. I walked over to the heavy wooden door of the suite and cracked it open just enough to peek out into the main ceremony hall. The string quartet was already playing soft instrumental music, and the guests were taking their seats. I looked over at the right side of the aisle. The groom's side was packed. It was filled to the brim with David's friends, his former business partners, our neighbors, and the incredible medical staff who had treated Sophie during her darkest days in the hospital. They were laughing and talking, creating a warm and vibrant atmosphere. They were a beautiful community of people who genuinely loved and supported us. Then I slowly moved my gaze to the left side of the aisle, the bride's side. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold wave of pure devastation washed over me. There were exactly 50 wooden chairs set up on my side of the aisle, and every single one of them was completely empty. Not a single person from my family had shown up. I stared at the perfectly aligned rows of vacant seats, hoping that maybe they were just running late. Maybe my aunt or my cousin would rush through the doors at the last minute. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was not a scheduling conflict or a traffic delay. This was a calculated and orchestrated boycott. My father Richard and my mother Catherine had used their massive influence and deep pockets to forbid the entire extended family from attending. They had likely threatened to cut off financial help for my cousin's college tuitions or publicly shame anyone who dared to support my wedding. They wanted me to look out at those empty chairs and feel the crushing weight of their rejection. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to stand there in my white dress and realize that without their approval, I was completely alone in the world. I closed the door to the bridal suite and leaned back against the cool wood, trying to catch my breath. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. The sheer cruelty of it all was suffocating. It was one thing for my parents and my sister Brittany to refuse to come. I had accepted that when I signed away my trust fund in the church vestry. But to manipulate people I had known my entire life into abandoning me on my wedding day was a level of vindictiveness I could barely comprehend. They were punishing me for refusing to submit to their control. Tears, hot and heavy, began to well up in my eyes. I tilted my head back to the ceiling, fighting with every ounce of my strength to keep them from falling and ruining my makeup. I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hands, trying to ground myself in the physical pain, but the emotional agony was too loud. For 33 years, I had tried so hard to be the good daughter. I had compromised my own happiness. I had swallowed my pride, and this was my reward: total isolation. I felt like a foolish little girl who had finally pushed her family too far. The panic started to set in. My chest tightened and the room started to spin. I did not know how I was going to walk down that long aisle and face all of those people, knowing that not a single person from my bloodline loved me enough to show up. Suddenly, the door to the bridal suite gently pushed open behind me. I turned around, expecting to see the wedding coordinator. Instead, I saw David. He was not supposed to see me before the ceremony, but the moment he looked at my face, he knew something was terribly wrong. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, completely ignoring the traditional rules. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo, but his blue eyes were filled with deep concern. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides and gently took both of my trembling hands in his. His touch was warm and steady. He did not say a word about the empty chairs. He just looked directly into my eyes, anchoring me to the present moment. "I am so embarrassed," I whispered, my voice breaking. "They really did it, David. They made sure I had absolutely no one." David squeezed my hands firmly. "Look at me, Lauren," he said, his voice soft, but filled with unwavering conviction. "You are not alone. Those empty chairs out there do not define your worth, and they do not dictate your future. Your parents think family is about control. They are wrong. Family is about who holds your hand when the world walks away." He wiped a single tear from my cheek. "We are not sitting at their table anymore, Lauren," he continued. "Let them have their empty wealth. Today we are building our own table, and the people sitting at our table love us exactly as we are. You are about to become my wife and Sophie's mother. We are your family now." I finally smiled, feeling perfectly safe and ready. David wiped the last tear from my cheek and smiled gently. The heavy oak doors of the bridal suite clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone for just a few more seconds to collect myself. I took a deep breath, letting the sweet scent of white roses fill my lungs. The fear and the crushing weight of rejection that had paralyzed me just moments before were completely gone. My family had tried to use their absence as a weapon to destroy my wedding day, but David had effortlessly disarmed them. He reminded me that I was not losing a family, I was finally building one. The gentle melody of a string quartet began to float through the air, signaling the start of our ceremony. I stepped out of the suite and took my place at the back of the venue, completely out of sight from the seated guests. From my hidden vantage point, I could see the entire beautiful layout of the room. The visual contrast was incredibly stark and deeply emotional to witness. On the left side, exactly 50 perfectly polished wooden chairs sat completely empty. They were a glaring physical monument to my parents' conditional love and my sister Brittany's toxic jealousy. But on the right side, the large room was overflowing with vibrant life. Every single available seat was filled. I saw the incredible oncology nurses who had worked the grueling night shifts during Sophie's darkest hospital days. I saw our wonderful neighbors who had brought us hot meals when we were too exhausted to cook. I saw David's loyal old business partners who had fiercely supported him when his world was falling apart. They were all looking toward the front of the room with absolute joy radiating on their faces. The music shifted to a very soft and beautiful acoustic guitar melody. It was finally time for the procession to begin. Traditionally, this was the exact moment when a young flower girl would walk down the aisle, gently tossing delicate rose petals onto the crisp white runner. But we were not a traditional family, and this was certainly not a traditional wedding. 10-year-old Sophie confidently stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains and took her rightful place at the top of the aisle. My breath completely caught in my throat the very second I saw her. She looked like an absolute angel standing there. She was wearing a beautiful ivory lace dress that matched my bridal gown perfectly. Her hair was still very short, serving as a physical reminder of the brutal chemotherapy treatments she had bravely endured over the past 2 long years. But her precious face was glowing with vibrant health and a massive, radiant smile. She started walking slowly down the aisle, but she was not holding a tiny woven basket of flowers. Instead, she was firmly holding a very large rustic wooden sign with both of her small hands. She carried it proudly, resting it slightly against her chest so that every single person in the crowded room could clearly read what was written on it. As she took her first few steps down the long white runner, a sudden massive wave of emotion quickly swept through the attentive crowd. It started at the very back rows and rippled forward rapidly like a powerful, gentle tide. I watched quietly from the dark shadows as people instinctively leaned in closer to read the bold, painted letters. The sign did not feature a standard traditional wedding phrase. It was not a cute little message about the bride finally arriving. It was a raw, unfiltered testament to the true meaningful definition of family. The carefully painted letters read exactly like this. My grandfather told the church my dad was used baggage that would ruin her life. But when my dad's insurance denied my cancer treatment, she secretly sold her house to save me. Today, the judge made her my legal mom. The immediate reaction from the large crowd was completely instantaneous and absolutely overwhelming. The room did not just politely erupt in applause, it completely erupted in raw, visceral emotion. The previous peaceful silence of the conservatory was immediately broken by the loud sound of sharp gasps and heavy muffled sobs. I watched closely as David's tough, rugged groomsmen quickly reached up to wipe away falling tears. The dedicated oncology nurses sitting in the third row completely broke down, holding on to each other and crying freely. Even the stoic professional venue coordinator standing near the floral archway had to quickly turn her head away to compose herself. Absolutely no one outside of David and the hospital billing department had ever known about the house. When Sophie's aggressive leukemia had relapsed, David's primary insurance company had ruthlessly denied the massive claim for the experimental medical treatments she desperately needed to survive. He was temporarily locked out of his financial assets while negotiating the complex sale of his software company, and he was rapidly running out of precious time. My wealthy parents had completely refused to help us, calling it a terrible financial investment. So without telling anyone, I had quietly listed my small, beloved starter home, the very house I had spent years meticulously saving for. I successfully sold it and wired every single penny directly to the pediatric oncology center to fully cover her expensive treatments. I moved into a tiny rented apartment and never once looked back. To me, it was not a sacrifice. A house is just simple wood and cheap drywall. Sophie was my amazing daughter. There was absolutely no difficult choice to make. As Sophie continued her confident walk down the long aisle, I saw Jamal's younger sister sitting near the back row. She was one of my absolute oldest friends from college and the only single person from my past life who had braved my parents' intense wrath to be here today. She currently had her phone out recording the entire beautiful moment. She expertly captured the 50 empty wooden chairs on the left side of the room. She captured the overwhelming, beautiful outpouring of genuine love on the right side. And she beautifully captured brave Sophie, happily carrying that sign, with warm tears of pure joy streaming down her own rosy cheeks. I knew right then I wanted the world to see what true, unconditional love actually looked like. I wanted people to know that shared blood does not automatically make a family. Loving action makes a family. Selfless sacrifice makes a family. Sophie reached the end of the aisle and walked straight into David's waiting arms. He knelt down right there in front of the elegant altar in his black tuxedo and wrapped his arms tightly around his little girl. His broad shoulders shook slightly as he buried his face in her small shoulder, completely overwhelmed by the sheer emotional magnitude of the beautiful moment. The entire crowded room collectively stood up and immediately started clapping loudly. It was not polite, quiet wedding golf claps. It was a massive, roaring, standing ovation. The deafening applause echoed off the tall glass walls of the sunny conservatory, completely drowning out the silence of those 50 empty chairs. The ceremony concluded with a feeling of absolute triumph. David kissed me, and the entire right side of the room erupted in cheers. The empty chairs held no power over me. As we transitioned into the reception hall, the atmosphere was electric. The conservatory had been transformed into a warm, glowing space filled with fairy lights. The people celebrating with us were not bound by obligation. They were there because they genuinely cared. While David helped Sophie cut the wedding cake, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned around and saw Nia. Nia was Jamal's younger sister, and she had been my closest friend since our freshman year of college. She was a brilliant graphic designer and the only person connected to my family who had the courage to defy my parents' strict boycott. When my father had issued the decree forbidding anyone from attending my wedding, Nia had simply laughed in his face. She had seen firsthand how my sister Brittany treated Jamal, and she knew exactly how toxic my parents could be. Nia pulled me into a tight hug, squeezing me so hard I could barely breathe. "You look absolutely stunning, Lauren," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I hugged her back, feeling deep gratitude. "Thank you for being here, Nia," I said. "I know your brother and my parents are probably furious with you." Nia waved her hand dismissively, her dark braids catching the fairy lights. "I do not care what they think," she said fiercely. "I came here to support you. And honestly, I am so glad I did because I caught something incredible on camera." Nia reached into her small beaded clutch and pulled out her smartphone. She unlocked the screen and held it up for me to see. She had recorded Sophie's entire walk down the aisle. But she had not just filmed Sophie. Nia had started the recording by panning across the 50 completely empty chairs on the bride's side, perfectly capturing the cold isolation my parents had tried to force upon me. Then the camera panned to the groom's side, showing the packed rows of smiling, supportive faces. Finally, the lens focused perfectly on Sophie walking bravely down the white runner holding that large wooden sign. As I watched the video on Nia's small screen, I could hear the sharp gasps and the muffled sobs of the guests all over again. It captured the exact moment the room realized what I had done to save Sophie's life. It captured David falling to his knees and pulling his daughter into a desperate, loving embrace. The video was visually stunning, but more importantly, it was the raw, unfiltered truth. It was a perfect documentary of everything my family had tried to destroy and everything David and I had managed to build, in spite of them. "Lauren, this video is unbelievably powerful," Nia said, looking me directly in the eyes. "The world constantly feeds us this toxic narrative that blood is thicker than water and that we have to tolerate abuse just because it comes from family. People need to see this. They need to see what real unconditional love actually looks like. They need to know that it is okay to walk away from toxic people and choose a family that actually values you." Nia paused, taking a deep breath. "I want your permission to post this on my social media," she asked gently. "I want to share it." I stared at the frozen frame of David holding Sophie on the phone screen. For my entire life, my father had controlled the narrative. He was the powerful church elder who stood on a pulpit and told thousands of people what to believe. He had used his platform to publicly humiliate my husband and paint me as a reckless, foolish daughter. If I let Nia post this video, I would be taking my power back. I would be letting the absolute truth speak for itself. "Yes," I said, nodding my head slowly. "Post it, Nia. Let people see it." Nia smiled brightly, hugging me one more time before stepping away to type out the caption and upload the video. I completely put the interaction out of my mind and went back to enjoying my wedding reception. The rest of the afternoon was an absolute blur of joy and laughter. David and I danced for hours, surrounded by our wonderful friends and the amazing medical staff who had become our chosen family. We ate delicious food, we toasted to a bright future, and for the very first time in my 33 years of life, I did not spend a single second worrying about my parents' approval. It was not until much later that evening that I finally realized something strange was happening. David and I had retreated to our beautiful honeymoon suite at a luxury hotel downtown. Sophie was safely sleeping in the adjoining room, exhausted from all the cake and dancing. I was sitting on the edge of the large plush bed, carefully taking the pins out of my bridal updo. My white leather bridal clutch was resting on the nightstand next to me. Suddenly, I heard a loud, continuous buzzing sound coming from inside the bag. It sounded like a massive, angry swarm of bees. I reached over and unzipped the small clutch. The moment my fingers brushed against my smartphone, I actually gasped and pulled my hand back. The metal casing of the phone was incredibly hot. It was almost burning to the touch. I carefully grabbed the device by the edges and pulled it out. The screen was completely illuminated, but it was freezing and glitching violently. The notification banners were dropping down from the top of the screen so fast that they blurred together into a solid white block. It was literally impossible to read a single word because a new notification was replacing the previous one every millisecond. My phone was vibrating so aggressively that it rattled against my hand. I tried to unlock the screen by swiping my thumb across the glass, but the operating system was completely overwhelmed. The apps were crashing and the screen kept flashing black before lighting up again with hundreds of new alerts. David walked out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a towel, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the frantic flashing light illuminating the dark bedroom. "What in the world is wrong with your phone?" he asked, frowning in confusion. I stared at the glitching device as the truth suddenly washed over me like a tidal wave. I remembered the video Nia had taken. I remembered the powerful contrast between the empty wooden chairs and the room full of weeping strangers. I managed to force close the crashing apps and open my text messages for just a split second before the phone froze again. I saw 50 unread texts from numbers I did not even recognize. Then I saw a single text from Nia that had come through hours ago. It simply read, "Lauren, the video just hit 5 million views, and it is not slowing down." The world was watching our story. 48 hours later, I woke up in our honeymoon suite. The morning sun poured through the curtains, but the peace shattered when I looked at David. He sat staring at his tablet. He looked up at me with a complicated mix of shock and concern. "Lauren?" he said, barely above a whisper. The video Nia posted just crossed 200 million views. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering. 200 million. It was a number so large my brain could barely process it. This was no longer a viral moment. Our wedding was a global phenomenon. I threw off the duvet and rushed to the screen. The video completely transcended social media and made its way onto national morning news broadcasts. Major anchors were wiping tears from their eyes on live television, discussing the stark visual contrast of the 50 empty wooden chairs compared to Sophie carrying that heartbreaking sign. The comment section was a relentless tidal wave of absolute fury directed entirely at my family. People worldwide were passionately sharing their own painful stories of toxic relatives and religious hypocrisy. But the internet is not just a place for sharing emotional stories online. It is an incredibly efficient investigative machine. Within the first 24 hours, internet sleuths completely mobilized and started hunting for the truth. It started with someone recognizing the distinct stained glass windows of my father's megachurch from an old post on my sister Brittany's public social media profile. Once they had the exact location, the rest of the dominoes fell with terrifying speed. They quickly identified Richard as the wealthy head elder of the congregation. They dug up hours of archived footage, finding videos of his Sunday sermons where he passionately preached about the sanctity of family. The blatant hypocrisy was simply too delicious and infuriating for the internet to ignore. Angry users immediately began splicing clips of my father shouting righteously from the pulpit about protecting vulnerable children right next to the beautiful footage of his biological granddaughter walking down the aisle with a sign explaining how he abandoned a 10-year-old battling leukemia. The side-by-side video comparisons were absolutely devastating, and they spread like absolute wildfire across every single platform on the internet. By the 48-hour mark, the massive digital outrage had physically manifested into the real world. Local news helicopters were actively circling the sprawling campus of my father's Texas megachurch. Hundreds of peaceful but highly vocal protesters had gathered on the public sidewalks directly outside the main sanctuary gates. They were holding up their own handmade signs demanding immediate accountability from the church leadership. Some of the cardboard signs simply read 50 empty chairs, while others directly demanded that the congregation permanently remove a head elder who would cruelly abandon his own flesh and blood over medical debt. My mother, Catherine, was currently experiencing her own personal psychological nightmare as the digital storm raged. Her entire fragile identity was deeply wrapped up in her pristine public image and her elite country club status. But the internet sleuths had identified her too. Her wealthy socialite friends, who usually spent their leisurely mornings playing tennis and gossiping about other people, were suddenly treating her like a highly radioactive pariah. Her phone was constantly blowing up, not with comforting messages of support, but with passive-aggressive inquiries from furious church board members demanding an immediate explanation for the unprecedented public relations catastrophe. But the most severe and immediate financial consequences were actually hitting my brother. My brother-in-law, Jamal, had spent years carefully building his pristine reputation as a highly sought-after corporate lawyer. His downtown Dallas law firm heavily prided itself on exclusivity, prestige, and perfectly curated client reviews. However, the relentless internet sleuths had quickly linked Brittany directly to Jamal, and they absolutely did not hold back their righteous anger. They aggressively descended upon his firm's business pages across every major professional review site on the internet. In less than a single day, Jamal's perfect 5-star rating was completely decimated by the angry mob of thousands of strangers online. Tens of thousands of one-star reviews relentlessly flooded his professional business profile. People were leaving scathing comments deeply questioning his moral compass and his professional legal ethics. They publicly asked how anyone could ever trust a corporate lawyer to negotiate fair business contracts when he happily enabled the financial abuse and emotional abandonment of an innocent pediatric cancer patient. The digital review bombing was so incredibly intense that the hosting platforms had to temporarily lock his business pages, but the severe reputational damage was already done. Brittany, my sister, who had spent her entire pampered life shielded, basking in the warm glow of being the untouchable golden child she was suddenly facing, the incredibly harsh glare of massive public accountability. Her perfectly curated lifestyle influencer pages were completely overrun with angry, disgusted comments from former fans. Corporate sponsors began quietly dropping her, pulling their lucrative endorsement deals to avoid being publicly associated with the viral cruelty. For the very first time in her 29 years of privileged life, her wealthy parents could not just throw money at the problem to buy her way out of the severe consequences of her own highly toxic behavior. David and I sat quietly in our beautiful hotel room, watching the massive empire my parents had built slowly crumble under the crushing weight of its own hypocrisy. David reached over and gently closed the tablet, placing it face down on the nightstand. "We did not ask for any of this," he said quietly, pulling me into a warm, comforting hug. "We just wanted to get married in peace, surrounded by people who love us. But they could not let you go without trying to break you one last time. Now the whole world sees exactly who they are." I leaned my head against his chest, feeling a very complicated mixture of sweet vindication and profound sadness. My parents had spent my entire life desperately trying to control the narrative. They had used their vast wealth, their massive church, and their social influence to paint themselves as the perfect Christian family, while consistently treating me like an acceptable casualty. They had confidently orchestrated the cruel boycott of my wedding, fully expecting me to suffer in complete silence. They never anticipated that their calculated absence would echo louder than any words they could have ever spoken to me. I knew my toxic family better than anyone else in the entire world. I knew that they did not possess the emotional maturity or the basic humility to reflect on their terrible actions and issue a genuine apology. Narcissists do not apologize when their masks are ripped off. They retaliate. They double down on their delusions and viciously attack the person who exposed them. They were currently backed into a massive corner, completely humiliated on a global stage, and rapidly bleeding social currency by the second. I looked at David and took a deep breath. "We need to pack our bags and go home," I told him, my voice steady. "They will not let this go. They will come for us." David and I had barely finished packing our suitcases for a quiet weekend getaway when the aggressive pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was the kind of frantic, heavy thudding that shakes the doorframe and makes your heart drop into your stomach. I froze in the middle of the living room, holding a stack of folded sweaters. David immediately stepped in front of me, his posture defensive. He walked over to the front door of our new home and looked through the peephole. His jaw tightened instantly. Before he could even turn around to tell me who it was, the pounding started again, followed by my father's muffled voice yelling demands through the solid wood. "Open this door, Lauren! I know you are in there! Open the door right now!" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. I nodded at David, signaling that it was okay. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My family did not even wait for an invitation. They surged into our foyer like a hostile occupying force. My father Richard pushed his way to the front, his face purple with absolute rage. My mother Catherine followed closely behind him, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. My sister Brittany stomped in wearing dark, oversized sunglasses despite it being cloudy outside. And finally, my brother-in-law Jamal stepped inside, slamming our front door shut behind him. His usual composed lawyer demeanor was completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic and fury. None of them looked sorry. None of them looked like they had spent the last 48 hours reflecting on their cruel behavior. They looked like cornered animals ready to attack the person who had trapped them. My father did not waste a single second. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "Are you happy now?" He shouted, his booming pastor voice echoing off our high ceilings. "Are you satisfied with the absolute disaster you have created? You have completely ruined my life, Lauren. The church is a circus. We have news vans parked on the grass destroying the landscaping. We have hundreds of angry protesters screaming at the congregation. Do you have any idea how much money we have lost in the last 2 days? Our biggest corporate donors are pulling their funding. The church board called an emergency meeting this morning to discuss my immediate resignation. Everything I have built for 30 years is collapsing because you wanted to play the victim on the internet." I stood my ground, holding the folded sweaters tightly to my chest. "I did not create this disaster," I replied, my voice completely steady. "I did not force you to stand on that pulpit and call David used baggage. I did not force you to abandon your granddaughter. All I did was let people see the truth. The truth is what ruined your life, Dad." My mother let out a loud, dramatic gasp, stepping forward to defend him. "How dare you speak to your father that way?" She shrieked, her eyes wide with frantic anger. "We are the victims here, Lauren. Do you know what my life has been like for the past 2 days? I cannot even show my face at the country club. My friends are completely ignoring my phone calls. We have received death threats. People are calling us monsters. You orchestrated this entire thing just to humiliate us because you are a selfish, ungrateful brat. You set us up." I could not believe the absolute delusion I was hearing. "I set you up?" I asked, taking a step forward. "You boycotted my wedding. You threatened to take away my inheritance. You tried to financially ruin me just to control my life. But somehow I am the villain because a video of my beautiful stepdaughter went viral. You are not victims, Mom. You are just finally experiencing the consequences of your own terrible actions." Brittany ripped her dark sunglasses off her face, throwing them onto our entryway table. They clattered loudly against the wood. "Oh, please, Lauren, do not act like you are so innocent," Brittany yelled, her voice shrill and grating. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You used that sick kid for sympathy points, and now my entire career is completely destroyed." 3 of my biggest brand sponsors dropped me this morning. They sent me legal emails saying my association with this family is toxic to their public image. I am losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in brand deals because of your stupid wedding stunt. You owe me, Lauren. You owe all of us. David stepped forward, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. His presence was calm, but incredibly intimidating. "You need to lower your voices right now," David said, his tone dangerously quiet. "You are in our home. You will not stand here and scream at my wife." Jamal pushed past Brittany, his face twisted with professional panic. "This goes way beyond screaming, David," Jamal said, pointing an angry finger at him. "Do you understand what your little viral video has done to my law firm? My business pages are completely destroyed. I have thousands of one-star reviews calling me an unethical monster. Clients I have worked with for years are calling my partners and threatening to take their business elsewhere. My professional reputation is in absolute ruins. I have spent a decade building my career, and Lauren destroyed it in 48 hours. You need to fix this right now." I looked at the 4 of them standing in my living room. They were shouting over each other, listing their financial losses and their ruined social lives. Not a single one of them asked how Sophie was doing. Not a single one of them apologized for missing the most important day of my life. Not a single one of them expressed even a fraction of remorse for the incredible pain they had caused. They were entirely consumed by their own selfish problems. "I am not fixing anything," I said, my voice slicing through their chaotic shouting. "I cannot fix your reputations because your reputations were built on a lie. You want people to think you are this perfect, loving Christian family, but the moment someone challenged your authority, you threw me away like garbage. The internet is just giving you the exact same energy you gave me my entire life. My father took a menacing step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. "You are going to fix this, Lauren," he growled, his eyes filled with genuine hatred. "You are going to make a new video. You are going to tell the world that you exaggerated the situation and that we are a loving family. You are going to clear Jamal's name, and you are going to tell those protesters to leave my church alone. If you do not do exactly what I say, I swear I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. I was not scared anymore. I was finally free from their toxic control. "Get out." The air in our living room was thick with heavy tension after I confidently told my family to get out of my house. My father, Richard, looked like he was going to completely explode, but before he could launch into another massive screaming match, my mother suddenly changed her entire strategy. Catherine was an absolute master manipulator. She knew exactly when intimidation failed, and she knew that playing the fragile victim was her next best weapon. Her rigid posture instantly softened. Her shoulders slumped forward, and her perfectly flawless makeup crumbled into a dramatic mask of pure devastation. She brought her manicured hands up to her cheeks and let out a loud, trembling sob. It was an incredibly convincing performance worthy of a major acting award. "Oh, Lauren, please do not do this to us," she cried, her voice shaking with artificial heartbreak. "We are a family. We are supposed to always protect each other no matter what happens. You are so angry right now, and I completely understand that, but you have to see how this internet nightmare is destroying the people who lovingly raised you. We simply cannot let a silly misunderstanding tear our beautiful family apart forever." She slowly reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a neatly folded piece of crisp white paper. Her hands were shaking just enough to make her look incredibly vulnerable, but her eyes remained cold and highly calculating. She took a slow step toward me, holding the paper out like it was a desperate peace treaty. "I hired a top-tier public relations firm yesterday morning," she explained, her voice dripping with fake maternal desperation. "They told us exactly how to fix this massive disaster. All you have to do is sit down on your couch right now with David and little Sophie. We will record a very short video on my smartphone. Just 2 quick minutes, Lauren. That is absolutely all I am asking from you today. You just need to read exactly what is printed on this paper. It will beautifully explain everything to the angry public and make this horrible internet mob go away for good." I did not reach out to take the paper from her hand. I just stood there and looked down at it. The text was typed out in very large, bold letters, so I could easily read it from a comfortable distance without needing glasses. I quickly scanned the first few lines and immediately felt my stomach violently turn. The entire script was a complete and absolute fabrication. It started with me profusely apologizing to the whole world for causing unnecessary family drama on my wedding day. But the second paragraph was what truly showcased my mother's terrifying level of delusion. It literally instructed me to look directly into the camera lens and state that the wooden sign Sophie carried was actually just a silly inside joke that got completely taken out of context by the internet. The script then went on to falsely claim that my wealthy parents had generously paid for all of Sophie's pediatric cancer treatments out of the pure goodness of their hearts. It actually stated that the viral story about me selling my house was just a beautiful metaphor for the deep emotional sacrifice our entire extended family made during her terrible illness. I stared at the crisp white paper, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of what I was currently reading. They desperately wanted to steal my ultimate sacrifice. I had sold the very first home I had ever owned. I had packed my entire life into cardboard boxes and moved into a tiny, cramped apartment just to make sure a 10-year-old girl could get the expensive chemotherapy she desperately needed to survive. My parents had completely refused to give us a single dime, calling her medical treatments a terrible financial investment. And now, when their pristine public reputation was rapidly burning to the ground, they demanded that I go on the internet and give them all the glorious credit for saving her precious life. They wanted the entire world to look at them as generous Christian saviors, while actively painting me as a highly dramatic, confused daughter who made a poorly timed joke at her own wedding ceremony. For a brief moment, the entire room was completely silent. Everyone was watching me intently, waiting for me to break down crying and immediately agree to their insane demands. Jamal looked incredibly hopeful for the very first time since he walked through my front door. Brittany was tapping her expensive high heel impatiently against my hardwood floor. My mother pushed the paper slightly closer to my chest, offering me a watery, highly fake smile. I looked at the printed paper. Then I looked at my mother, and finally, I looked at my father. A very strange, bubbling sensation suddenly started deep in my chest. It rapidly traveled up my throat, and before I could even try to stop myself, I let out a sharp, loud laugh. It was absolutely not a happy laugh. It was a dark, disbelieving laugh that echoed loudly in the quiet living room space. My mother's fake, watery smile instantly vanished from her face. "What is so incredibly funny?" she demanded, her voice immediately dropping the fragile victim act and snapping right back to her usual sharp, arrogant tone. I shook my head, completely unable to stop laughing at them. The sheer absurdity of the situation was just way too much for my brain to process. "You are actually completely insane," I said, wiping a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. "You frantically drove all the way to my house, forcefully broke into my living room, and handed me a fake script written by a desperate public relations firm. You genuinely expect me to sit on this couch and tell 200 million people that you paid for Sophie's cancer treatments. You actually think I am going to let you steal the heroic credit for saving my daughter's life, just so you can comfortably show your face at the country club again without feeling embarrassed." I stopped laughing and my voice turned completely ice cold. "Mom, you did not even buy Sophie a cheap get-well card when she was suffering in the hospital," I said, taking a firm step toward her. "When her beautiful hair started falling out from the aggressive chemotherapy, you specifically told me you did not want to visit her because sick children made you feel deeply uncomfortable. Dad, you aggressively told me I was completely financially reckless for taking on her medical debt. You literally tried to force me to cancel my beautiful wedding by legally threatening to take away my grandmother's inheritance. And now you completely expect the entire world to blindly believe that you are the brave heroes of this tragic story. You are not heroes at all. You are absolute cowards. I will absolutely never read your pathetic script. You can take your incredibly fake apologies, and you can kindly walk right out my front door before I call the local police to forcefully remove you both today." My mother, Catherine, stood frozen in the center of my living room. Her fake tears instantly dried up the moment she realized her perfectly rehearsed victim routine had completely failed. She lowered the pathetic public relations script and glared at me with pure venom. Before she could say another word, my younger sister Brittany aggressively pushed past her. Brittany was absolutely fuming. The golden child had never been told no in her entire life, and she was clearly losing her mind over her rapidly crumbling influencer empire. Brittany crossed her arms tightly across her chest and glared at me. "Fine, Lauren," she snapped, her voice sharp and incredibly loud. "If you are going to be completely stubborn and refuse to read the apology script, then we need to talk about compensation." I stared at her, completely confused by the sudden shift in conversation. "Compensation?" I asked. "What on earth are you talking about, Brittany?" Brittany rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh, as if I was the most oblivious person on the planet. "I am talking about the massive amount of money you are about to make from this ridiculous internet stunt," she said, taking a step closer to me. "Do not play dumb with me, Lauren. We both know how social media works. That wedding video of yours has over 200 million views across multiple platforms. People are actively sharing it millions of times every single hour. You are probably getting flooded with direct messages from major television networks, daytime talk shows, and documentary producers offering you massive exclusive interview deals. Not to mention the direct ad revenue you and that friend of yours are pulling in from the video platforms themselves." I stood there completely speechless. While I was focused on the incredible emotional impact of the video and the beautiful outpouring of support for my new family, My sister was frantically sitting at home calculating my potential ad revenue. It was deeply disturbing, but completely on brand for her. You used our family name and our specific situation to create a viral spectacle. Brittany continued, her voice rising with entitlement. You literally built your viral moment on the back of our father's public reputation. Without his sermon and without our empty chairs, your little video would just be another boring wedding clip nobody cares about. We are the villains of your little movie. Lauren and villains drive engagement. Because of your stunt, I have lost 3 of my biggest lifestyle brand sponsors this morning alone. My carefully curated public image is in absolute ruins because you decided to play the tragic hero. Jamal shifted uncomfortably in the background, clearly shocked by his wife's blatant greed, but he did not step forward to stop her. My father Richard just stood there nodding slowly as if Brittany was making a perfectly logical business pitch. So here's the deal, Brittany said, planting her hands firmly on her hips. Since you are directly profiting off the destruction of my career and our parents' public image, we demand 50% of all the money you make from this video. Every single monetization payout, every single television interview fee, and any book deals or movie rights you secure from this drama. Half of it belongs to us. It is only fair compensation for the massive emotional and financial distress you have intentionally caused this family. I actually felt the room spin for a brief second. The sheer audacity of her demand pushed the confrontation past the point of anger and straight into absolute madness. You want me to pay you royalties for abandoning me on my wedding day? I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. You want 50% of the revenue because you were so incredibly cruel that the entire world decided to hold you accountable. It is not royalties, Lauren, it is brand compensation, Brittany fired back without missing a single beat. Mom and Dad paid for your entire life. They raised you in a beautiful home. They gave you everything you ever needed. And I am losing hundreds of thousands of dollars because the internet hates me now. You owe us this money. It is the absolute least you can do since you refuse to clear our names. If you agree to sign a legally binding contract giving us 50% of the profits, we will stop demanding the apology video and we will quietly let you enjoy your little viral fame. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at the floor. Jamal? I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air. You are a highly educated corporate lawyer. Are you seriously going to stand there and let your wife try to extort me for viral internet money? Is this what your prestigious law firm considers a fair settlement? Jamal adjusted his expensive tie but refused to meet my eyes. He was too deeply entangled in their toxic web to speak up for what was right. His silence was absolutely deafening. I turned my attention back to my sister. Brittany, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. You are not getting a single dime from me, ever. You are not a victim of my viral video. You are a victim of your own ugly personality. You lost your brand deals because those companies realized you are a deeply selfish and shallow person who would gladly let a child suffer just to save a few dollars. No amount of money is going to buy your reputation back. Brittany's face turned bright red. She opened her mouth to scream at me, but I immediately cut her off. I did not monetize that video, Brittany, I told her firmly. I told Nia to post it because the world needed to see the truth. I have not accepted a single interview offer. I have not signed any deals. I do not care about the money or the internet fame. The only thing I care about is my husband and my daughter. But even if I was making millions of dollars from that video, I would rather burn every single penny in my backyard than give you half of it. My father took a threatening step forward, his face twisting with rage. You will regret this, Lauren, he spat, his voice shaking with fury. You think you have won because a bunch of strangers on the internet feel sorry for you. But you have no idea what I can do to you. Actually, Dad, I think you have absolutely nothing left to do. You played all your cards, you tried to ruin my wedding, you took away my inheritance. Now you are literally standing in my living room begging for a cut of my internet views. It is just incredibly pathetic to watch you all unravel like this. Now get out of my house right this second before I call the local police and have you all formally arrested for criminal trespassing. My absolute refusal to give Brittany a single penny was the final straw. My father Richard had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who bowed to his authority. He was a wealthy megachurch elder used to giving orders and having them instantly obeyed by his congregation and his family. Watching his youngest daughter openly defy him and effectively kick him out of my house completely shattered his fragile ego. His face turned a deep shade of crimson, and the prominent vein in his forehead throbbed visibly. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us, until he was standing just inches away from my face. He pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. "You arrogant little brat!" he hissed, his voice vibrating with a terrifying level of suppressed rage. "You think you can just embarrass me in front of the entire world and then casually dismiss me from your home? You think because you have a few million internet views you are suddenly untouchable. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I built this family and I can absolutely destroy your entire life." He did not even wait for me to respond before he sharply turned his head to look at my brother-in-law. "Jamal," he barked, his voice returning to its booming authoritative volume, "I want you to go back to your office right now and begin drafting a massive defamation lawsuit against Lauren. I want her sued for every single penny she has to her name. I want you to immediately file an emergency injunction to completely freeze all of her personal and joint bank accounts. We are going to bleed her dry in civil court. I want her medical licenses suspended pending an investigation for emotional instability. I want you to subpoena her phone records, her private emails, and her social media accounts. You are going to build a legal case so incredibly aggressive that she will be forced to publicly beg for our forgiveness just to afford her monthly grocery bill. Do you understand me, Jamal? You are the family lawyer, and it is time for you to do your job and protect our legacy from this ungrateful child." I stared at Jamal, praying that he would finally find his moral compass. He was a highly intelligent African-American corporate lawyer who had worked incredibly hard to build a successful career based on facts and justice. But standing there in my living room under the intense, demanding gaze of his wealthy father-in-law, Jamal completely caved to the pressure. He adjusted his expensive designer glasses and gave a slow, calculated nod. "I will have the preliminary paperwork drafted and ready for your signature by tomorrow morning, Richard," he said, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "We can easily argue that her video caused direct measurable financial harm to your church donations and my firm. We will file it in the Supreme Court downtown to ensure maximum public visibility." A cold wave of genuine panic suddenly washed over me. This was not just a family argument anymore. They were literally weaponizing the American legal system to financially destroy me. I knew exactly how expensive and exhausting a prolonged legal battle could be. Even if we eventually won the case, the exorbitant lawyer fees alone could easily bankrupt us and completely jeopardize the stable, peaceful life David and I were trying to build. Just as my father opened his mouth to deliver another cruel threat, the solid wood door of our home office slowly clicked open. The sound was quiet, but it immediately drew everyone's attention. David stepped out into the hallway. He was wearing a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, looking completely out of place among my family's expensive tailored suits. But his posture was incredibly dominant. He did not look angry or intimidated. He looked remarkably calm, like a man holding a winning lottery ticket, waiting for the perfect moment to cash it in. He walked directly into the center of the living room, completely ignoring my parents and my sister. He did not even look at them. He walked straight over to where Jamal was standing. In his right hand, David was holding a very thick, heavily sealed brown manila envelope. It looked like a massive financial dossier, stuffed to the absolute brim with official legal documents. David stopped right in front of the glass coffee table separating us from my family. He looked Jamal dead in the eye and casually dropped the massive envelope onto the table. It landed with a heavy, loud thud that echoed through the silent room. Jamal stared down at the sealed package, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What exactly is this?" Jamal asked, his ruthless lawyer persona slipping just a fraction. David crossed his arms over his chest and offered a cold, humorless smile. That is a comprehensive financial and legal dossier? David replied, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. It contains detailed bank statements, certified property deeds, and a few incredibly interesting federal tax documents that I strongly suggest you review. My father scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. Do not try to intimidate us with fake paperwork. You broke widower. Richard sneered. We are taking everything you have. David shifted his gaze from Jamal to my father and back to Jamal, ignoring the insult. Jamal, you are a very smart corporate lawyer. David continued, his tone unwavering. You understand the severe legal consequences of filing a frivolous lawsuit. You also understand the concept of legal discovery. Before you go back to your fancy downtown office and draft a defamation lawsuit against my wife, you better sit down and read every single page inside that envelope. Because if you decide to take this case, I promise you that everything in those files will become a matter of public record. And when that happens, I can assure you that Lauren will absolutely not be the one facing federal prison. The heavy envelope sat on my coffee table like a ticking bomb. My father Richard stared at it with pure disgust, but I noticed a slight tremor in his hands. He crossed his arms tightly. Do not touch that garbage, Jamal. My father barked, his voice echoing. Let us go back to your office and file the paperwork now. Jamal did not move. He was a trained corporate attorney, and his career was built on evaluating evidence. His eyes were locked on the thick sealed package. Jamal slowly reached out and picked up the envelope. He broke the wax seal and pulled out a massive stack of perfectly organized financial documents. The very first page was a certified bank statement from the institution holding my late grandmother's trust fund. I watched Jamal's face closely. His annoyance slowly morphed into genuine professional curiosity, and then within seconds, it shifted into absolute horror. He flipped to the second page and then the third, his eyes scanning the numbers with rapid precision. The silence in the living room was only broken by the crisp sound of paper turning. What is it, Jamal? My sister Brittany asked. Stop reading their fake printouts and let us leave. Jamal did not answer her. He pulled out another thick packet of papers. These were copies of authorized withdrawal slips and wire transfer receipts. Jamal, I asked, my voice steady and calm. Can you please tell my family exactly what you are looking at? Jamal slowly looked up. His face had lost all of its color. He stared directly at my father. Richard, what exactly did you do? Jamal asked, his voice barely a whisper. My father swallowed hard, trying to keep his chin held high. I have no idea what you are looking at. Richard fired back defensively. Whatever they printed is fabricated. Jamal shook his head, holding up a stack of wire transfer receipts. This is not fabricated, Richard. Jamal said, his tone shifting to a ruthless interrogator. These are federally certified banking records possessing the official watermarks from the estate management firm. You told me that you legally withheld Lauren Trust Fund because she violated the morality clause by marrying David. You sat in my office and had me review the estate bylaws to ensure you had the fiduciary right to freeze her assets. Jamal took a deep breath, his hands shaking. But her trust fund is completely empty, Richard. It has been empty for months. You did not freeze her assets. You completely drained them. My mother, Catherine, let out a dramatic gasp, grabbing my father's arm. Richard, what is he talking about? She demanded, wide-eyed with sudden panic. Jamal flipped through the withdrawal slips, reading the massive dollar amounts out loud. $50,000 wired to an offshore account in the Bahamas 3 years ago. $80,000 withdrawn in pure cash during a trip to Las Vegas 2 years ago. Another $100,000 wired to a private luxury vehicle dealership just last year. Jamal looked at the dealership name and then slowly turned his head to look at my sister Brittany. Brittany took a step back, her face suddenly pale. What are you looking at me for? She asked defensively. That is the exact dealership where you bought your new luxury SUV last year, Jamal said, turning incredibly cold. You told me your father bought it for you as a bonus for hitting 1 million followers. But this wire transfer came directly out of Lauren Trust Fund. Money was funneled directly from Lauren inheritance into your personal checking accounts to fund your designer handbags, your luxury vacations, and your country club memberships. Brittany shook her head frantically, pointing a finger at David. They are lying, she screamed. They hacked our accounts and made those fake papers to frame us. David let out a dry chuckle, pointing at the bottom of the withdrawal slips. Look at the signature lines, Jamal, David said calmly. Every single transfer requires the signature of the primary beneficiary. Lauren never signed a single piece of paper authorizing those massive withdrawals. Her signature was completely forged every single time. Forging a signature to drain a multi-million-dollar trust fund is not a civil dispute. It is a massive federal crime. The reality crashed into the room like a heavy freight train. My father had not threatened to take away my inheritance because he disapproved of my wedding. He threatened to take it away because the money was already gone. He had spent the last 5 years secretly battling a hidden gambling addiction. He had been quietly flying to offshore casinos and burying himself in massive debt. To cover his tracks and maintain his pristine, wealthy image, he systematically forged my signature and stole my entire $2 million inheritance. And he used a huge portion of my stolen money to fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle, keeping his golden child happy and perfectly oblivious. Jamal dropped the papers onto the glass table as if they were physically burning his hands. He backed away from my father, his eyes wide with absolute disgust. You used me, Jamal said, his voice shaking with terrifying quiet anger. You came into my law firm and asked me to help you intimidate Lauren into walking away from her trust fund. You wanted her to sign that renunciation contract in the church vestry so you would finally have legal cover for the millions of dollars you already stole from her. You tried to make me an unwitting accomplice to massive federal wire fraud. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The powerful, untouchable head elder of the megachurch was completely gone. He was just a pathetic, desperate criminal standing in my living room, completely exposed. I looked at the four of them, watching their perfect, wealthy facade shatter into 1 million irreparable pieces. The power dynamic in the room had violently flipped, and there was absolutely no going back. The shock of my father's massive financial crimes still hung heavily in the air of my living room. Jamal looked like he was going to be physically sick. He dropped the forged wire transfer receipts back onto the glass coffee table and took a long step away from my father. But David was not finished. He stood calmly in the center of the room, with his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his dark jeans. Keep reading, Jamal. David instructed, his voice completely level and unaffected by the chaotic emotional breakdown happening around him. You have only seen the first half of the dossier. Turn to the second tab. Jamal hesitated for a brief second before reaching down and flipping to a thick section of documents marked with a bright red legal sticker. He pulled out a stack of incredibly dense corporate filings and federal tax records. As Jamal began to read, his eyes widened to an almost comical degree. He pushed his designer glasses up the bridge of his nose and brought the papers closer to his face, as if he simply could not believe the printed numbers. What is it now, Jamal? My sister Brittany demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with lingering panic. Did he forge more documents? Jamal slowly shook his head, keeping his eyes glued to the papers. No, Brittany, he replied, his voice completely hollow. These are certified corporate acquisition filings from the Federal Trade Commission. They belong to David, my mother. Catherine let out a confused scoff. What could possibly be in a bankrupt widower's financial files? She asked, rolling her eyes. A list of his overdue credit card bills. Jamal looked up and stared directly at my mother. David is not bankrupt, Catherine, he stated flatly. According to these legally binding federal documents, David is the sole founder and primary shareholder of a medical technology software firm. a firm that was just officially acquired by a massive global healthcare conglomerate exactly 2 weeks ago. Jamal paused, swallowing hard before reading the final number out loud. The official cash buyout was $150 million. The entire room instantly went dead silent. It was a completely different kind of silence than the one that followed my father's fraud revelation. This was a suffocating, stunned silence born from absolute disbelief. My father Richard stared at David, with his jaw practically unhinged. Brittany actually stumbled backward until her back hit the hallway wall. $150 million, my mother whispered, her eyes darting frantically between David and the legal documents in Jamal's hands. That is completely impossible. He could not even afford his own daughter's cancer treatments. He made Lauren sell her house. David finally smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile that did not reach his eyes. I did not make Lauren sell her house. Catherine. David explained, his tone smooth and sharp. When my daughter's cancer aggressively relapsed, my primary medical insurance ruthlessly denied the experimental claim. At that exact same time, my software company was in the middle of a highly sensitive international acquisition. All of my major financial assets and liquid capital were completely frozen under strict federal non-disclosure agreements and corporate auditing lockouts. I was legally barred from liquidating any shares to pay for the medical treatments out of pocket. I was running out of time to save my little girl. Lauren did not hesitate for a single second. She quietly sold her home and saved my daughter's life while you wealthy hypocrites completely turned your backs on us. My father shook his head rapidly, desperately trying to process the massive wealth currently standing in my living room. If you are a multimillionaire, why did you not tell us? Richard demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. Why did you let me stand on that pulpit and humiliate you? Why did you let us think you were broken and worthless? I never cared what you thought about me, Richard. David replied, taking a slow, deliberate step toward my father. I do not need to flash my bank account to prove my worth as a man. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly who Lauren was. But I also knew exactly who you were. I wanted to see how you would treat a man who could offer you absolutely no social status or financial gain. And you proudly showed me your true colors. David turned his attention back to Jamal, who was still clutching the corporate buyout papers like a lifeline. Turn to the final folder, Jamal. David instructed, his voice dropping an octave. Read the real estate acquisitions from last Thursday. Jamal quickly flipped to the very back of the massive envelope. He pulled out a crisp stack of commercial property deeds and municipal zoning records. He scanned the first page, and his jaw visibly tightened. He looked up at my father and then back down at the deed. Richard. Jamal started, his voice trembling slightly. Does the megachurch actually own the 20-acre commercial property it sits on, or do you lease the land from a private holding firm? My father blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden pivot in conversation. We lease the land, he answered defensively. The church signed a 50-year commercial lease agreement with a private Texas real estate consortium over a decade ago. Why does that matter right now? Jamal slowly slid the property deed across the glass coffee table so my father could clearly see the bold printed logo at the very top of the page. Because, Richard, the private Texas real estate consortium that owns your land was completely bought out last Thursday morning, Jamal explained. It was fully acquired by a newly formed shell company called Beacon Holding Group. Jamal pointed a shaking finger at the signature line at the very bottom of the commercial deed. And David is the sole listed proprietor and absolute controlling owner of Beacon Holding Group. The devastating reality of the situation hit my father with the brute force of a runaway freight train. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale. He staggered backward, bumping into my sofa. The man he publicly called used baggage in front of 500 people. The man he had tried to force me to abandon. That exact same man was now his ultimate corporate landlord. David literally owned the ground my father walked on. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You told the entire congregation that I would financially ruin your daughter. David whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. But the truth is, Richard, I am the only reason you are not currently being evicted. I own the dirt under your massive church. I own the parking lot. I own the sanctuary where you stood and tried to destroy my family. You wanted to use your wealth to intimidate Lauren into submission. But your wealth is completely gone. You stole it all. And your power is currently sitting in a brown envelope on my coffee table. The power shift was absolute and entirely irreversible. My father, the untouchable megachurch elder, was now completely at the absolute mercy of the man he hated most. The crushing reality of David owning the megachurch property hung in the air like a thick fog. My father Richard was physically leaning against the sofa, completely paralyzed by the massive power shift. But while my father was retreating into stunned silence, my sister Brittany was rapidly spiraling into a state of absolute frantic panic. She stared at the thick stack of forged wire transfers and federal bank statements still resting in her husband's hands. Her perfect golden child facade was aggressively cracking right in front of our eyes. Those documents were the physical proof that her luxurious life was funded by stolen money. If those papers made it to federal authorities, she would lose her brand deals, her massive penthouse, and potentially her freedom. Brittany breathing became incredibly shallow and erratic. Her eyes darted wildly around my living room, looking for a way out of the inescapable trap they had walked into. Jamal, I need you to give me those papers right now, Brittany demanded, her voice shaking with a terrifying mix of fear and aggressive entitlement. She took a step toward her husband, holding her hand out. Jamal looked at her, horrified by the massive federal crimes his in-laws had just committed. He held the documents tightly against his chest, shaking his head. I cannot give these to you, Brittany, Jamal said, his voice tight with professional panic. This is federal evidence of massive wire fraud and grand larceny. I am an officer of the court. I cannot just hand over evidence of a felony so you can pretend it does not exist. The word felony seemed to be the breaking point for my sister. Her eyes went wide and a guttural scream of pure frustration ripped from her throat. Without any warning, Brittany lunged violently across the glass coffee table. Her expensive designer handbag crashed to the hardwood floor, spilling makeup and credit cards everywhere. She grabbed handfuls of the certified bank statements, trying to violently rip them out of Jamal's hands. Jamal stumbled backward, completely caught off guard by his wife's sudden physical attack. Brittany let go of those files, Jamal shouted, trying to hold the papers out of her frantic reach. But Brittany was absolutely relentless. She clawed at his suit jacket, ruining the expensive fabric as she desperately tried to snatch the forged withdrawal slips. You are our family lawyer, she screamed, her voice shrill and deafening in the enclosed space. You are supposed to protect us, Jamal. I am your wife. You need to invoke attorney-client privilege right this second and throw those papers into the fireplace. Burn them, Jamal. Burn the files and tell the police that David fabricated the entire thing to blackmail us. We can still spin this narrative if you just destroy the evidence. Jamal stared at the woman he had married, looking as though he was seeing a complete stranger. You want me to destroy federal banking evidence? He asked, his voice trembling with absolute disgust and disbelief. You want me to burn documents proving your father stole $2 million and then casually commit perjury by framing David for blackmail? Are you completely out of your mind, Brittany? That would instantly result in my permanent disbarment and a guaranteed federal prison sentence for both of us. You are asking me to completely destroy my entire life and my legal career. I do not care about your stupid legal career, Brittany shrieked, her face turning a deep, ugly shade of red. She stopped grabbing at the papers and pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. I care about my life, Jamal. Do you have any idea what will happen to me if the internet finds out my luxury cars and designer clothes were bought with her stolen trust fund money? My influencer brand will be completely decimated. I will be a global laughingstock. You have to protect me. You promised to protect me when we got married. The room suddenly went perfectly still as her careless words hung heavily in the air. I looked at Brittany, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had assumed my father had hidden his gambling debts and the trust fund theft from everyone, including his golden child. But looking at her desperate, terrified face, the absolute worst realization washed over me. "You knew," I whispered, my voice barely audible, but carrying clearly across the quiet room. "You knew he was stealing my inheritance." Brittany froze, her eyes briefly darting toward our father before snapping back to me. The mask completely slipped off, revealing the incredibly ugly, greedy truth hiding underneath her perfect blonde hair. She did not try to deny it or apologize. Instead, she doubled down with breathtaking cruelty. "So what if I knew?" Brittany yelled, completely losing her grip on reality. "You never deserved that money anyway, Lauren. You were just going to waste it all on some pathetic charity or give it to that sick kid. I actually needed that money to build my brand. I am the face of this family. I am the one who brings in the wealthy connections and keeps our social status intact. Dad was just reallocating the funds to the child who actually gave a return on the investment." My mother, Catherine, covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled gasp of shock. Even she had apparently been kept in the dark about the stolen money. But Brittany did not care who she hurt or who she betrayed as long as she maintained her lavish lifestyle. She stood in the center of my living room, openly admitting that she had knowingly lived off my stolen inheritance while mocking me for struggling to pay for pediatric cancer treatments. She watched me sell my tiny starter house. She watched me cry myself to sleep from the overwhelming financial stress. And she did absolutely nothing but happily drive her brand new car bought with my stolen money. The living room fell into a suffocating silence after Brittany openly admitted she knew the money funding her luxurious lifestyle was stolen directly from my trust fund. She stood there breathing heavily, her face completely twisted with selfish entitlement, expecting her husband to magically fix the massive federal crimes her family had committed. But Jamal was not looking at her with the usual adoration or patience he had always shown his wife. He was looking at her as if she were a highly venomous snake that had just bitten him. Jamal was a self-made man. He had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, working 2 jobs to put himself through law school and passing the bar exam on his very first try. He built his prestigious corporate law career on absolute integrity and unwavering respect for the law. My parents had always acted like they did him a massive favor by allowing him to marry into our wealthy family. But looking at the forged bank statements scattered across the glass coffee table, the absolute truth was finally undeniable. Jamal was the only person in their circle who possessed real moral wealth. Jamal slowly lowered his hands completely, ignoring his wife and her frantic demands to burn the federal evidence. He bent down and began meticulously gathering the scattered bank statements, the forged wire transfers, and the corporate real estate deeds. He stacked them together, tapping the edges on the glass table to perfectly align the crisp pages. My father, Richard, watched him with a sudden glimmer of desperate hope. "Jamal, please," my father begged, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority. "You are the family lawyer. We can figure this out behind closed doors. We can draft a quiet settlement agreement and keep the authorities out of it." Jamal slid the thick stack of papers back into the heavy brown envelope. He did not look angry anymore. He looked entirely professional and detached. "Richard, I am not the family lawyer," Jamal said, his voice slicing through the heavy air with icy precision. "As of this exact moment, I am formally refusing to represent you in any legal capacity whatsoever. I officially advise you to retain outside criminal defense counsel immediately because you are going to need it. You completely manipulated me. You invited me into my sister-in-law home under the false pretense of filing a civil defamation lawsuit when you secretly knew you had committed grand larceny. You tried to use my pristine legal reputation as a protective shield for your own massive federal crimes. If I help you cover this up, I lose my license, my firm, and my freedom. I will not let you drag me down into your pathetic criminal nightmare." My father opened his mouth to argue, but Jamal had already turned his back on him. Jamal shifted his intense gaze directly to his wife. Brittany took a small step backward, realizing her usual tactics of screaming and crying were completely failing to manipulate him. Jamal, you cannot just walk away from us, Brittany pleaded, her voice cracking. I am your wife. We took vows to protect each other. You have to help me fix this. Jamal let out a harsh, humorless laugh. We took vows based on honesty and mutual respect, Brittany, he replied, his tone dangerously calm. But you just stood in this living room and proudly admitted that you knowingly funded your designer wardrobe and luxury cars with money your father stole from your sister. You watched Lauren sell her tiny starter house to pay for pediatric cancer treatments while you happily drove a brand new vehicle bought with her stolen inheritance. You are not a victim here, Brittany. You are a willing accomplice to a massive financial fraud. Brittany began to sob loudly, reaching out to grab his arm, but Jamal swiftly stepped out of her reach. Do not touch me, Jamal ordered, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I am completely and utterly disgusted by you. I am disgusted by your greed and your breathtaking lack of basic human empathy. I am officially filing for divorce the second the courthouse opens tomorrow morning. Brittany let out a loud, dramatic wail, collapsing onto the sofa, but Jamal was entirely unmoved by her theatrical performance. Furthermore, Jamal continued, speaking over her loud sobbing. I am immediately calling my personal wealth management team. I am freezing every single one of our joint bank accounts and putting an immediate lock on our shared investment portfolios. Since you are legally implicated in receiving stolen federal funds, I am aggressively protecting my personal assets from your criminal liability. You will not see another dime of my hard-earned money. You better hope the brand sponsors you are crying about do not sue you for a breach of morality, because you are completely financially cut off starting right now. Jamal turned away from his weeping wife and looked directly at David and me. The tension in his shoulders seemed to drop slightly as he stepped forward and handed the heavy brown envelope safely back to David. I am profoundly sorry, Lauren, Jamal said, his voice filled with genuine heavy regret. I allowed their toxic entitlement to blind me to the truth. I should never have come into your home and threatened you with a lawsuit. You and David have every single right to take these documents straight to federal authorities, and I will absolutely testify on your behalf when you do. David took the heavy envelope, nodding once in a silent show of mutual respect between two men who truly understood accountability. Jamal buttoned his ruined suit jacket, completely ignoring my parents, who were standing frozen in the corner of the room. He walked straight to the front door without looking back once. He opened the heavy door and stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, leaving his completely fractured and thoroughly exposed family behind him in the wreckage of their own making. 2 days later, the intense Texas heat was beating down on my father's megachurch. Inside the executive boardroom, an emergency meeting was in full swing. The mahogany table was surrounded by the wealthiest donors and primary financial backers. They were desperately trying to address the massive public relations nightmare that had engulfed their congregation since my wedding video went globally viral. David, Jamal, and I walked through the quiet hallways without checking in. Jamal wore a sharp charcoal suit, looking every inch the elite lawyer. David walked beside him, carrying the heavy envelope filled with my father's financial ruin. I walked between them, feeling absolute calm. Today, I would permanently dismantle the toxic empire that had tried to destroy my new family. Jamal pushed open the heavy boardroom doors without knocking. The loud thud instantly silenced the frantic conversation inside. All 20 heads snapped in our direction. My father, Richard, was standing at the head of the table, pointing at a projected chart of declining daily donations. When he saw us standing in the doorway, all the color instantly drained from his face. What is the meaning of this? Richard demanded, his booming voice echoing with forced authority. This is a highly classified emergency meeting. You are not permitted to be here. Security will remove you immediately. None of us moved a single inch. Jamal stepped forward, taking the lead. He made direct eye contact with the wealthiest donors and senior elders. Good morning, gentlemen, Jamal said, his voice projecting perfectly. My name is Jamal, and I am a senior corporate partner at my downtown law firm. More importantly, today, I am acting as the official legal advisor for my sister-in-law, Lauren. We are not here to disrupt your public relations strategy. We are here to prevent this entire board from being legally implicated in a massive federal crime. The room erupted into frantic murmurs. A prominent real estate developer who had donated millions stood up. "What federal crime?" he asked, looking alarmed. Richard assured us the viral video was just a family dispute blown out of proportion by the media. My father slammed his hands down on the mahogany table. "Do not listen to a single word they say," Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at us. "My daughter is deeply mentally unstable. She is acting out because we refuse to endorse her marriage. Jamal is currently going through a bitter divorce with my other daughter. They are disgruntled and fabricating wild lies to extort this church." Jamal did not flinch at the desperate defamation. He calmly took the heavy brown envelope from David and unsealed it right in front of the board. He pulled out the certified bank statements and the forged wire transfer receipts. "Richard is lying to you," Jamal stated, his voice slicing through the tension like a razor blade. "He is not the righteous victim of a viral internet mob. He is a desperate criminal who has spent the last 5 years actively engaging in grand larceny and federal wire fraud." Jamal began passing the certified financial documents down the long table, allowing the wealthy donors to see the absolute truth with their own eyes. Jamal explained exactly what they were looking at. He detailed how my father had drained my $2 million trust fund to secretly pay off massive offshore gambling debts and fund his golden child luxurious lifestyle. Jamal pointed out the forged signatures and the federal watermarks on the banking records. "This is not a simple family dispute." Jamal continued pacing slowly alongside the table. "This is a severe breach of fiduciary duty. Richard has a documented gambling addiction. If he is willing to completely steal $2 million from his own biological daughter's trust fund, you need to immediately ask yourselves what he has been doing with the millions in untaxed church donations you have trusted him to manage." The absolute horror on the faces of the board members was incredibly visceral. The wealthy donors were staring at the forged bank statements in complete shock. The head of the church finance committee turned to my father, his face completely pale. "Richard, is this true?" the older man asked, his voice trembling with betrayal. "Did you forge her signature and steal her inheritance?" My father looked like a cornered animal. He desperately looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, but found nothing except deep suspicion. "It was my money," Richard stammered, his voice completely losing its usual powerful cadence. "I built this family. I built this church. You cannot let them destroy me over a private financial reallocation." He just admitted to the fraud, Jamal announced clearly, his voice rising above the chaotic murmurs. He confessed to stealing the funds in front of 20 legal witnesses. Jamal then pulled out the final document from the envelope. "And just to clarify the current power dynamic in this room, I have one more document to share." Jamal placed the commercial real estate deed directly in front of the primary financial donor. "As of last Thursday, the private holding company that owns the land this megachurch is built on was completely acquired by my client David. Your head elder publicly humiliated a man on Sunday without realizing that he was insulting his own corporate landlord. David fully controls the commercial lease." David stepped forward next to Jamal. "We are taking the evidence to the federal authorities this afternoon," David said, his voice perfectly calm. "Before we do, Lauren wanted to give you the opportunity to clean house. You have 1 hour to permanently remove Richard and strip him of all authority. If he is still affiliated by noon, I will terminate your lease and evict this entire congregation." The silence was absolute. The elite board members stared at David, recognizing he held all the cards. My father slowly sank into his chair, completely defeated. His reputation and absolute power were permanently gone. The showdown was over, and we had won. The fallout from the emergency boardroom meeting was incredibly swift and absolutely devastating. The wealthy donors and senior elders of the megachurch did not hesitate for a single second. Within exactly 1 hour of David and Jamal presenting the forged financial documents, my father Richard was formally stripped of his prestigious title as head elder. He was escorted out of the massive glass building by private security guards, while confused congregants watched in stunned silence. But losing his powerful position within the church was only the very beginning of his rapidly unfolding nightmare. True to their word, the church board of directors immediately contacted federal authorities to protect their own legal liability. By the next morning, the Internal Revenue Service and federal investigators officially opened a massive criminal probe into my father's personal finances. They seized his computers, froze his remaining assets, and began auditing every single financial transaction he had made over the past 10 years. The man who had proudly stood on a pulpit and publicly shamed my husband for having medical debt was now facing multiple counts of federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and severe tax evasion. His entire identity had been built on projecting an image of untouchable spiritual and financial superiority, but now he was nothing more than a desperate, disgraced criminal waiting for a federal indictment behind cold steel prison bars. As my father's massive, fraudulent empire completely collapsed, my mother, Catherine, experienced her own personal hell. For decades, my mother had meticulously curated her life around elite social status and wealthy appearances. Her entire self-worth was directly tied to her exclusive memberships and the fake adoration of her high society friends. But the viral video and the subsequent federal investigation completely obliterated her carefully constructed reality. The prestigious country club where she spent most of her time having lunch and gossiping about other people officially revoked her membership. They cited a strict morality clause in their bylaws, stating that the severe criminal allegations against her husband brought unacceptable public shame to their elite establishment. When she desperately tried to call her wealthy friends for emotional support, every single one of them completely ignored her calls. The women she had spent years drinking expensive wine with simply treated her like a highly contagious disease. They completely erased her from their social calendars and blocked her number. Without her elite social circle and her pristine public image, my mother had absolutely nothing left. She was trapped inside her large, empty house, completely isolated and forced to finally face the ugly reality of the toxic family dynamic she had actively helped create and enable for so long. But perhaps the most dramatic and satisfying downfall belonged to my younger sister, Brittany. For her entire 29 years of life, Brittany had been the ultimate golden child. She had never faced a single consequence for her incredibly selfish actions because my parents always used their stolen wealth to pave her way. But without my stolen trust fund money and without her husband's massive corporate salary, her luxurious lifestyle evaporated literally overnight. Jamal was absolutely relentless in his legal proceedings. True to his word, he filed for divorce the very next morning and aggressively froze all of their joint financial accounts. Because Brittany was legally implicated in knowingly receiving stolen federal funds, the divorce judge granted Jamal complete control over the marital assets pending the criminal investigation. Brittany was given exactly 48 hours to completely vacate the massive downtown luxury penthouse she had treated like her own personal castle. I actually saw a brief news clip of her moving out on a local gossip blog. The untouchable lifestyle influencer was photographed dragging heavy black trash bags filled with her designer clothes down the sidewalk. Her expensive luxury sports car, the one she bought using my stolen inheritance, was officially repossessed by the federal government as part of the criminal fraud investigation. Without any brand sponsors willing to touch her highly toxic public image, she had absolutely zero personal income. The sister who had arrogantly demanded 50% of my viral internet revenue was now frantically trying to sell her used designer handbags on the internet just to afford a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. She tried to post a tearful apology video online claiming she was a victim of her father's financial manipulation, but the internet simply did not buy her fake tears. Her comment section was completely flooded with screenshots of the brutal text messages she had sent me and people relentlessly mocking her sudden tragic downfall. In less than a single week, The perfect, flawless image my family had spent 30 years building was permanently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, inadequate, and completely unworthy of unconditional love. They had used their money and their social power as weapons to control everyone around them. They truly believed they were completely untouchable because they had never been held accountable by anyone. But the sheer arrogance that made them feel so incredibly powerful was the exact same thing that caused their ultimate destruction. They underestimated me. They underestimated David and his quiet, hidden strength. And they severely underestimated Jamal and his unwavering commitment to the law. They gambled their entire legacy on the false belief that I would always just bow down and accept their cruel abuse in absolute silence. Now they had absolutely nothing. No megachurch to preach from. No luxury cars to drive around in. No expensive country club memberships to flaunt. No elite social status to hide behind. And most importantly, they no longer had a family to blindly support their delusions. They were completely fractured, turning on each other like wild animals to desperately save themselves from the massive legal and financial ruins of their own making. They were finally paying the ultimate price for their cruelty. The toxic empire they built was completely destroyed forever. I sat comfortably on the wooden deck of our new backyard. The late afternoon Texas sun cast long, peaceful shadows across the grass. David was pushing Sophie on a rustic tire swing he had just finished building that morning. It was the exact kind of quiet, ordinary happiness I had spent my entire life desperately searching for. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass patio table. The screen flashed my sister Brittany's name. I wanted to let it ring out into the void, but I knew deep down that I needed to close this heavy door permanently. I took a slow, deep breath, reached out, picked up the device, and answered the call, putting it directly on speakerphone. "Lauren, please do not hang up!" Brittany immediately sobbed the second the line connected. Her voice was completely unrecognizable. It was frantic, breathless, and entirely stripped of all its usual arrogant entitlement. Jamal completely froze all of my personal and joint bank accounts. The federal agents showed up at my rented apartment early this morning. They are officially threatening to indict me as a criminal co-conspirator for the wire fraud because the stolen trust fund money went directly into my accounts to pay for my cars. I have absolutely nothing left, Lauren. I cannot even afford to buy groceries right now. I desperately need $50,000 to retain a decent federal defense attorney. You have to help me, Lauren. You are my sister, and we are family. I sat there in the warm sunlight listening to her hyperventilate through the phone speaker. I clearly remembered standing in the cold church vestry while she smugly smiled at my disinheritance. I remembered her standing in my living room aggressively demanding 50% of my viral video revenue. And I remembered how she had happily watched me sell my tiny starter home to pay for pediatric cancer treatments while she comfortably drove around in a luxury vehicle bought with my stolen inheritance. Brittany, I said, my voice completely calm and utterly devoid of any sympathy. From a purely legal and financial standpoint, taking on the massive legal debt of a federal criminal is a catastrophic liability. You are legally tethered to a sinking ship right now. Taking on someone else's financial liability is simply too much of a risk for my future. I am just looking at the risk assessment like Jamal taught us. There was a stunned, breathless silence on the other end of the line. She instantly recognized her husband's exact cold words from the church vestry. "Lauren, please, you cannot actually do this to me," she screamed, her voice cracking with sheer terror. But I had already pressed the red end call button. I calmly opened my phone settings and permanently blocked her phone number. I blocked my father. I blocked my mother. I completely severed the very last digital thread connecting me to their toxic world. I set the phone face down on the glass table and let out a long, deep breath. The heavy, invisible chains I had carried around my neck for 33 years instantly shattered. I was completely free. I looked out across the green grass. Sophie was laughing loudly as David spun the tire swing in wide circles. She was healthy, vibrant, and completely safe. David looked over his shoulder at me and flashed that warm, reassuring smile that had solidly anchored me through the absolute darkest moments of my life. He knew exactly who was on the phone, and he knew exactly what my peaceful expression meant. He knew the long, exhausting war was officially over. I stood up from the patio chair, walked down the wooden steps, and stood barefoot in the warm grass. I looked directly into the camera to deliver my final thought. For anyone watching this video who has ever been labeled the black sheep or the family scapegoat, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We are strictly conditioned from the exact moment we are born to blindly believe that blood is the most sacred and unbreakable bond in the entire universe. We are constantly taught by society that we must endlessly forgive our parents and our siblings simply because they are family. But shared blood does not ever give anyone a free pass to abuse you. Blood does not give them the divine right to steal your peace, your inheritance, or your self-worth. True family is not determined by a shared last name or a biological lineage. True family is defined entirely by consistent and loving actions. It is defined by the rare people who stand fiercely by your side when you have absolutely nothing material to offer them in return. It is defined by the people who genuinely celebrate your victories instead of secretly sabotaging them out of bitter jealousy. David and Sophie are my real family. My friend Nia and the incredible hospital staff who supported us are my chosen family. I had to bravely walk away from the toxic people who raised me, so I could finally find the wonderful people who truly loved me. You absolutely do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep your toxic relatives warm. You have the absolute right to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served. You have the power to stop chasing the conditional approval of people who are firmly committed to misunderstanding you. Your beautiful life is waiting for you on the other side of that difficult boundary. Build your own table today. Fill your empty chairs with genuine people who actually want to be there with you. The revenge they fear the most is absolutely not your anger or your sadness. The ultimate revenge is your complete indifference and your spectacular, unapologetic happiness. You absolutely deserve true and lasting peace. The most profound lesson we can learn from Lauren's story is that establishing firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of essential self-preservation. For far too long, society has conditioned us to believe that sharing biological blood obligates us to tolerate emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and relentless toxicity. We are repeatedly told that family is forever regardless of how poorly they treat us. But this narrative is deeply flawed and incredibly harmful. True family is never built on a foundation of control, guilt, or entitlement. It is built entirely on mutual respect, unwavering support, and consistent loving actions. When you finally stop investing your precious energy into people who are firmly committed to misunderstanding you, you create beautiful space in your life for those who truly value you. Walking away from a toxic environment does not make you a bad person. It makes you a survivor. Your peace of mind, your mental health, and your future happiness are worth infinitely more than the conditional approval of those who continually tear you down. The ultimate victory is not found in seeking revenge or proving them wrong. It is found in building a beautiful, peaceful life where their opinions simply no longer matter. If this powerful story resonated with your own personal journey, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from a toxic relative to protect your own peace? How did you find the strength to build your own chosen family? We would love to hear your incredible stories of resilience, so please share your experiences in the comments section below. Your story matters, and your healing journey can deeply inspire someone else today.